What if I told you that right now, as you're watching this video, there are things in forests around the world that shouldn't exist? Things that make experienced rangers quit their jobs and never speak about what they've seen. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to share with you 13 true stories that will change how you look at forests forever. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales. These are documented cases with witnesses, evidence, and consequences that lasted decades. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some forests have been permanently closed to the public, and why certain areas remain unmarked on any map. But I need to warn you, once you hear these stories, you might never want to go hiking alone again. They found children who had been missing for 50 years, but they hadn't aged a single day in 1973. 3 children vanished during a school camping trip in Blackwood Forest, Oregon. Marcus Chen, age 8, Alina Rodriguez, age 9, and Timothy Walsh, age 7, simply disappeared between their tent and the bathroom facilities 20 feet away. The search lasted 3 months. No trace was ever found. 50 years later, in 2023, Forest Ranger Diane Mitchell was conducting a routine patrol when she heard children laughing. Following the sound deeper into the restricted section of Blackwood, she discovered 3 children playing by a stream. They were wearing clothes from the 1970s and appeared to be around 8 or 9 years old. When Diane approached them, the children looked up with recognition. Marcus Chen smiled and said, "Are you here to take us back to camp? We've been waiting, but we can't find our way." Elena Rodriguez held up a friendship bracelet she'd been weaving, the same craft activity they'd been doing the night they vanished. Timothy Walsh asked if his parents were worried, because they'd only been gone since yesterday. Diane radioed for backup, but when she turned back, the children were gone. Only the friendship bracelet remained, along with 3 sets of small footprints that led directly into a solid rock face. Lab analysis confirmed the bracelet contained synthetic fibers that weren't invented until 1974, 1 year after the children's disappearance. The most disturbing detail came from Diane's body cam footage. In the background, barely audible, you can hear the children continuing to play and laugh for the entire 15-minute encounter, even during the moments when they appeared to be standing silently in front of her. The case was quietly closed again. The families were never contacted. Blackwood Forest's restricted section was expanded, and Diane Mitchell requested an immediate transfer to a different state. For 20 years, hikers reported seeing a man who only walked backwards until someone finally followed him. Pine Ridge National Forest in Montana has a legend that became terrifyingly real. Since 2003, dozens of hikers reported encounters with a man who walked backwards through the forest. Always the same description: tall, wearing a red flannel shirt, moving backwards with perfect coordination, never tripping or stumbling. Most witnesses assumed it was someone playing a prank or practicing some unusual form of exercise. The sightings were so consistent that the backwards walker became a local curiosity. Some hikers even tried to follow him, but he would disappear around bends in the trail. In 2023, experienced tracker Jonas Brennan decided to solve the mystery. Using trail cameras and GPS tracking, he mapped the backwards walker's routes and predicted where he would appear next. On October 15th, Jonas positioned himself along the predicted path and waited. The backwards walker appeared exactly as described, moving with unnatural fluidity. But as Jonas followed from a distance, he noticed something horrifying. The man's feet never quite touched the ground. He was floating an inch above the trail, moving backwards through the forest. Jonas followed for 3 hours, documenting everything. The backwards walker never paused, never looked around, never acknowledged the dozens of obstacles he somehow avoided. He moved in a perfectly straight line, regardless of terrain. The trail ended at a cliff face where a landslide had occurred in 1983. According to local records, a hiker named David Brennan had been killed in that exact spot, buried under tons of rock. David Brennan was Jonas's uncle, missing for 40 years. Jonas approached the cliff and called out his uncle's name. The backwards walker stopped, turned around for the first time in 20 years, and Jonas saw his uncle's face, exactly as it had looked in 1983. David pointed backwards, toward the direction he'd been walking, and spoke his first words in Decadese. "I'm trying to get back home, but I can't remember which way I was going." The backwards walker hasn't been seen since. Jonas moved away from Montana the following week. Park rangers discovered that trees in one section of forest were repeating conversations from decades ago. Willowbrook State Park in Washington had always been known for its unusual acoustics. Hikers often reported hearing faint voices in certain areas, usually dismissed as wind through the branches or echoes from other trail users. In 2022, Park Ranger Ashley Kumar began documenting these reports more seriously after receiving an unusual complaint. A family claimed they had heard their deceased grandmother's voice coming from a cluster of old-growth cedar trees, reciting a recipe she used to make. Ashley installed audio recording equipment throughout the grove and collected 3 months of data. The analysis revealed something impossible. The trees were replaying human conversations, some dating back decades. The recordings captured fragments of conversations in chronological layers. The oldest voices dated to the 1940s, when the area was privately owned. Researchers identified speakers from old land records, a family named the Hendersons who had lived in a cabin that once stood in the grove. But the conversations weren't random. They formed a narrative. The Henderson family had been murdered in their cabin in 1947, and the trees had somehow absorbed and preserved their final hours. The recordings revealed the killers' identities, their plans, and the location where they buried the family's valuables. Local police reopened the cold case using the tree recordings as evidence. They found the Henderson family's remains exactly where the voices indicated, along with the killers' names carved into the murder weapon buried nearby. The most chilling discovery came when researchers realized the trees were still recording. Every conversation that had ever taken place in the grove was being stored and would eventually be replayed. Ashley's own voice was already beginning to echo back to her, but altered, speaking words she'd never said. The grove was immediately closed to the public. The trees were scheduled to be removed, but the crew refused to cut them down after they began hearing their own voices emerging from the bark before they'd even spoken. A cabin appears in the forest every night at midnight, but only some people can see it deep in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas. Highway Patrol Officer Ryan Kowalski was investigating reports of a mysterious light that appeared in the forest every night at midnight. Local residents claimed to see a cabin where no cabin should exist, always in the same location, always occupied. Ryan set up surveillance equipment and waited. At exactly midnight on November 3, 2022, his thermal cameras detected a large heat signature where only empty forest had been moments before. Through night vision equipment, Ryan could see a fully illuminated log cabin with smoke rising from the chimney. He approached on foot and found the cabin was completely solid and real. Warm light glowed from the windows, and he could hear someone moving around inside. When he knocked on the door, an elderly woman answered, introducing herself as Margaret Hutchins. Margaret invited Ryan inside for coffee and conversation. She explained that she had lived in the cabin since 1952 with her husband Harold, who was sleeping upstairs. The cabin was completely furnished with period-appropriate items, filled with the smell of wood smoke and freshly baked bread. Ryan spent 3 hours inside the cabin, documenting everything with his body cam. Margaret showed him photographs of her family, shared stories about life in the mountains, and served him coffee from a pot that had been brewing on the wood stove. At 3 a.m., Margaret announced it was time for Ryan to leave. As he stepped outside, the cabin simply vanished. His thermal cameras showed the heat signature disappearing instantly, leaving only empty forest and the confused sounds of night animals. Ryan's investigation revealed that a cabin had indeed stood in that exact location. Margaret and Harold Hutchins had lived there until 1952, when they were found dead from carbon monoxide poisoning caused by a faulty chimney. The cabin had been demolished in 1953. The most unsettling evidence came from Ryan's body cam footage. While he appeared to be sitting alone in empty forest, drinking from an invisible cup and speaking to no one, the audio clearly captured Margaret's voice and the sounds of the cabin environment. Ryan requested a transfer the following week. The Ozark Midnight Cabin still appears every night, but the Forest Service no longer investigates. Every September, things that look like hunters enter this forest, but they're hunting something that isn't animals. Timber Ridge Forest in northern Idaho has been closed to hunting every September since 2019, following an incident that park officials refused to discuss publicly. The truth emerged through leaked documents obtained by local journalist Rachel Montana. For decades, local hunters had reported strange encounters during the harvest moon in September. They described seeing other hunters in the forest who moved wrong, carried weapons that didn't quite look like firearms, and tracked something that left no footprints. In September 2018, experienced hunter Carl Drayton was setting up his tree stand when he observed 6 figures in hunting gear moving through the forest below. Their behavior was immediately unsettling. They moved in perfect synchronization, never speaking, never making noise, and their heads turned in unnatural angles to scan the forest. Carl watched through his scope as the figures approached a clearing where he'd seen deer earlier. But they weren't tracking deer. They were following human footprints. Fresh footprints that belonged to other hunters in the area. The figures spread out and began what could only be described as a coordinated hunt. They moved with predatory efficiency, communicating through gestures that seemed too fluid to be human. Carl watched in horror as they closed in on the location where he knew other hunters had set up camp. Carl climbed down from his stand and followed at a distance. He found the hunters' campsite, but it was empty. Sleeping bags, equipment, and vehicles remained, but the hunters had vanished. The strange figures were gone as well. Park rangers found 3 hunters missing the next morning. They were discovered 48 hours later, wandering along a highway 30 miles away, with no memory of how they'd gotten there. Medical examinations revealed all 3 had identical needle marks behind their right ears. Security footage from trail cameras captured the incident. The footage shows the 3 hunters being led through the forest by the figures in hunting gear. But in daylight, when the footage was enhanced, the figures weren't wearing hunting gear at all. They appeared to be wearing some kind of metallic suits, and their faces weren't human faces. The September hunting ban was implemented immediately. The official reason given was wildlife conservation during breeding season, but internal documents refer to September harvest protocol and non-terrestrial hunting party management. In this forest, sound doesn't work properly, and what people hear instead will haunt you forever. Deadwater Marsh Preserve in Louisiana contains a section where sound behaves impossibly. The phenomenon was first documented in 2021 by audio engineer Victoria Chen, who was recording nature sounds for a documentary project. Victoria noticed that her equipment was picking up audio that didn't match what she could hear with her ears. While she heard normal forest sounds, her microphones were recording human voices speaking in languages that didn't exist. Intrigued, Victoria returned with more sophisticated equipment and a research team. They discovered that the marsh contained multiple layers of audio existing simultaneously. Modern sounds were present, but underneath were older voices, some dating back centuries. The team isolated different audio layers and made a horrifying discovery. The voices were speaking about events that hadn't happened yet. They heard conversations about technology that didn't exist, referring to people by names that hadn't been born yet, discussing wars and disasters decades in the future. But the most disturbing layer was the screaming, constant, agonized screaming that seemed to come from underground, as if thousands of people were trapped beneath the marsh and calling for help. Victoria's team brought in ground penetrating radar and found what they feared. Hundreds of human skeletons buried in the marsh sediment. layer upon layer going back centuries. The marsh had been a dumping ground for victims of violence spanning generations. The audio layers corresponded to different time periods of burial. Each group of victims was somehow still communicating, but their voices existed outside normal time. They could hear the past and future simultaneously, trapped in an eternal moment of death. The research was immediately classified when Victoria's equipment began picking up her own voice screaming for help, recorded 3 days before she disappeared. Victoria was found a week later at the bottom of the marsh, but she'd been dead for months, according to the coroner's report. The Deadwater Marsh Preserve was permanently closed. The official reason cited environmental contamination, but local residents still report hearing Victoria's voice warning people to stay away. Government workers enter this forest every full moon to collect something, but no one knows what Olympic National Forest in Washington has a section that's officially designated as Biological Research Area, but locals call it the Procurement Zone. Every full moon, unmarked government vehicles arrive at the forest's edge, and teams in hazmat suits enter the restricted area. Trail maintenance worker Diego Rivera discovered the truth by accident in 2020. Working late to repair storm damage, Diego witnessed the midnight team's arrival. Curiosity compelled him to follow them into the forest using deer trails he knew from childhood. The team moved with military precision toward a specific grove deep in the restricted area. Diego watched from concealment as they set up equipment around trees that looked normal during the day, but glowed with bioluminescent patterns at night. The team wasn't collecting plant samples. They were harvesting something that emerged from the trees themselves. Translucent, web-like substances that pulsed with their own light, moving as if alive. The workers collected the material in specialized containers that seemed to suppress the glow. Diego recorded everything on his phone, but the footage was corrupted except for the audio. The audio captured something impossible. The trees were screaming. High-pitched, agonized sounds that occurred whenever the workers harvested the glowing material. Research into government contracts revealed payments to biotech companies for exotic organic compounds with unprecedented neurological applications. The material was being used to develop experimental treatments for Alzheimer's disease and other brain disorders. But the trees were paying the price. Satellite imagery showed the grove slowly dying, the trees becoming gray and brittle where the material was harvested. Diego's investigation revealed that the glowing substance was the tree's nervous system, externalized and accessible only during full moons. Diego tried to report the story to environmental groups, but he was found dead in his apartment 3 days later. The official cause was listed as suicide, but Diego had left a note that contained only one sentence repeated hundreds of times. "The trees are screaming and I can't make it stop." The procurement zone continues to operate. Recent satellite images show the dead area expanding by several acres each month. Hikers keep reliving the same day in this forest, but each loop gets worse. Mirror Lake Trail in Colorado's Rocky Mountain National Park was closed indefinitely after 17 hikers reported experiencing impossible time anomalies. The incidents began in June 2021 and escalated until the trail was deemed too dangerous for public access. Hiker Priya Desai was the first to document the phenomenon comprehensively. On June 15, 2021, Priya began what should have been a simple day hike to Mirror Lake. She reached the lake around noon, took photos, and started her return journey. But instead of reaching the trailhead, Priya found herself back at the lake as if she'd just arrived. Her watch showed noon again. Her camera contained no photos. Her water bottle was full, despite having drunk most of it. Priya attempted to hike out again, but the loop repeated. Each iteration was slightly different. Sometimes the weather changed. Sometimes the lake was frozen despite the summer heat. Sometimes she encountered other hikers who shouldn't have been there. On the 7th loop, Priya encountered other trapped hikers. They formed a group, comparing experiences and trying to break the cycle. Some had been looping for days, others for weeks. Their physical condition never deteriorated. They never got hungry or tired, but their mental state was fragmenting. The loops began incorporating elements that didn't belong. Medieval knights appeared on the trail. Dinosaurs grazed by the lake. The forest changed seasons randomly, sometimes mid-step. The group realized they weren't just trapped in time, they were trapped in a collapsing reality. On the 15th loop, Priya discovered why. Mirror Lake wasn't a natural formation. Ground-penetrating radar revealed artificial structures beneath the water, a research facility that had been deliberately flooded decades earlier. The facility had been conducting experiments in temporal manipulation before something went catastrophically wrong. The research team had created a time distortion field to study historical events, but they'd lost control of the technology. The facility's AI systems were still running, still trying to complete their mission, creating increasingly unstable temporal bubbles to capture and study human behavior. Priya escaped on the 23rd loop by diving into the lake and swimming to the submerged facility. She found the emergency shutdown protocol and activated it, but not before the AI warned her that shutting down the system would release 40 years of compressed time all at once. When Priya surfaced, she found herself on the shore in 1981, watching the research facility being constructed. She aged 40 years in the span of walking back to the trailhead. Her final loop brought her to 2021, but she'd aged 4 decades in a single day. Priya's medical records confirm her impossible aging. Mirror Lake Trail remains closed. The water level has been dropping steadily since 2021, and construction equipment can now be seen beneath the surface. Animals in this forest don't hunt each other. They all hunt the same thing. And it's not what you think. Ravens Hollow in northern Minnesota contains an ecosystem that violates every known principle of natural predator-prey relationships. Wildlife biologist Dr. Helena Vasquez discovered the anomaly while researching wolf pack behavior in 2020. Vasquez noticed that the forest contained unusually high populations of predators with no apparent food source. Bears, wolves, mountain lions, and birds of prey all coexisted without competing for territory. Her trail cameras revealed why they were all hunting cooperatively. The footage showed wolves, bears, and mountain lions working together to surround and pursue prey. But the prey wasn't deer or smaller animals. The predators were hunting humans who entered the forest illegally. The animals displayed intelligence and coordination that shouldn't exist in nature. They used complex strategies, set traps, and communicated across species using methods that biologists couldn't explain. Most disturbing, they seemed to be learning and adapting their techniques based on each hunt. Dr. Vasquez's investigation uncovered a pattern of missing persons dating back to the 1960s. All had entered Ravens Hollow alone. All had disappeared without a trace, and all had been experienced outdoorsmen who should have been capable of surviving in the wilderness. The breakthrough came when Dr. Vasquez discovered that the animals weren't native to the region. Genetic testing revealed that every predator in Ravens Hollow had been artificially enhanced. Their brain structures had been modified to increase intelligence and enable cross-species communication. Government documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests revealed Operation Apex Predator, a classified military program from the 1960s designed to create intelligent animal soldiers. The program had been abandoned after a containment breach, but the enhanced animals had survived and continued breeding in Ravens Hollow. The animals had developed their own culture and hierarchy. They viewed humans as the ultimate prey, not for food, but as a test of their enhanced abilities. Each successful hunt increased their intelligence further, and they were evolving beyond their original programming. Dr. Vasquez's final report recommended immediate military intervention, but before action could be taken, she received a message from inside the forest. Her trail cameras had captured footage of the animals spelling out words using sticks and stones. "Dr. Vasquez, we know you're watching. Join us for the final hunt." Dr. Vasquez was found 3 days later unharmed but fundamentally changed. She refused to discuss her experience and resigned from her position. Her final statement to colleagues was, "They're not animals anymore. They're something new, and they're not confined to Ravens Hollow." Recent satellite imagery shows the enhanced predator population has quadrupled and is expanding into surrounding forests. A woman has been living in this forest for 30 years, collecting items that people didn't even know they lost. The Appalachian Trail's least documented mystery involves a woman known only as the Collector. For 30 years, hikers have reported brief encounters with someone who returns items they didn't realize they'd lost. Hiker Marcus Johnson experienced this phenomenon in 2019 while traversing a remote section of the trail in Virginia. Marcus had been hiking for 6 weeks when he encountered a woman in her 60s, living in a meticulously organized camp hidden among dense rhododendron bushes. The woman, who called herself Ivy, invited Marcus to examine her collection. She had thousands of items arranged in precise categories: jewelry, photographs, documents, tools, and personal effects. Each item was tagged with a date, location, and the name of the person who had lost it. Ivy handed Marcus a class ring that had belonged to his grandfather, lost during World War II. She had a leather journal belonging to Marcus's mother, lost during a hiking trip in 1985. She possessed items from Marcus's childhood that he'd forgotten existed, lost items from relatives he'd never met. Ivy explained that she could sense when someone lost something meaningful in the forest. The items would call to her, appearing in her camp regardless of where they'd actually been lost. She'd been collecting and cataloging lost things for 3 decades, waiting for their owners to find her. But Marcus noticed something disturbing about the collection. Many items were tagged with future dates. Ivy had a wedding ring labeled with Marcus's name and a date 3 years in the future. She had car keys belonging to people who wouldn't be born for decades. Ivy revealed the truth: she wasn't collecting lost things. She was collecting things that would be lost. The forest had given her the ability to perceive future losses, and she was gathering them before they happened. Marcus left with his grandfather's ring, but the experience haunted him. 3 years later, exactly on the date Ivy had predicted, Marcus lost his wedding ring during his honeymoon hiking trip. He returned to Ivy's location, but found only a note: "Marcus, I've moved on to collecting bigger things. Check the news tomorrow." The next day, news broke about a missing persons case. 17 hikers had vanished from various forests across the country, all experienced hikers who had reported encountering a woman who claimed to collect lost things. Ivy's camp was found by authorities, but it contained something new: a collection of driver's licenses, all belonging to the missing hikers, all tagged with dates from the past week. Hunters discovered that their trail cameras were recording things that hadn't happened yet. Echo Valley in Montana's Glacier National Park became the center of a temporal investigation after hunting guide Nathan Torres discovered that his trail cameras were malfunctioning in impossible ways. Nathan had placed 12 cameras throughout the valley to monitor deer movements for his guiding business. When he collected the memory cards after 2 weeks, he found footage that couldn't exist. The cameras had recorded normal wildlife activity, but mixed in were recordings of events that hadn't happened yet. Nathan watched himself on camera setting up equipment he hadn't purchased yet, in locations he'd never visited. One camera captured footage of Nathan's truck driving down a forest road that didn't exist. Another showed him meeting with clients who hadn't booked trips yet. Most disturbing, one camera recorded Nathan's own death in the forest, with a timestamp 3 weeks in the future. Nathan brought the evidence to electronics expert Dr. Kim Okafor, who confirmed the footage was authentic and unedited. The cameras were functioning normally, but somehow accessing temporal information from future events. Okafor's analysis revealed that Echo Valley contained unusual electromagnetic properties that seemed to bend space-time. The valley existed in a temporal fold where past, present, and future overlapped. Nathan decided to test the camera's predictions. He deliberately avoided the locations and activities shown in the future footage. But the cameras continued recording him doing exactly what he was trying to avoid, as if his attempts to change the future were themselves predicted. The death footage became increasingly detailed with each camera check. Nathan watched himself dying from 17 different angles, recorded by cameras he'd never placed. The videos showed every detail: the weather, the time, the exact cause of death, and even his final words. Nathan tried to leave Echo Valley permanently, but found himself drawn back repeatedly. The cameras were now recording footage of events days and weeks into the future, showing Nathan returning to the valley despite his efforts to stay away. On the date predicted by the cameras, Nathan was found dead in Echo Valley exactly as the footage had shown. But the cameras continued recording. They captured Nathan's ghost returning to check the camera footage, watching his own death, and expressing surprise that he was still somehow present in the valley. The cameras were removed by federal authorities, but not before they recorded the removal process weeks before it happened. Someone is planting human-shaped gardens in this forest, using materials you don't want to know about. Thornwood Forest in Oregon's Cascade Range has been closed to the public since Park Ranger Jennifer Walsh discovered what locals call the Midnight Gardens. The discovery was made during a routine patrol in March 2022, but the investigation revealed activities that had been ongoing for years. Jennifer found the first garden in a clearing that hadn't existed on any previous survey. The garden was elaborately designed in the shape of a human figure, planted with flowers and herbs that weren't native to the region. The plants were arranged to create anatomically correct proportions: roses for the heart, lavender for the brain, mint for the lungs. Further investigation revealed 12 more gardens scattered throughout the forest, each representing a different human figure. The gardens were meticulously maintained, with evidence of recent watering and pruning despite the forest's remoteness. Soil analysis revealed why the gardens were thriving in unsuitable conditions. The soil had been enriched with bone meal, but not from animals. Forensic testing confirmed human remains were being used as fertilizer, with different gardens containing remains from different individuals. Jennifer's investigation uncovered a pattern. Each garden corresponded to a missing person case from the past 5 years. The gardens weren't just memorials, they were graves. The missing persons had been murdered, cremated, and their ashes used to nourish elaborate funeral gardens. Trail cameras revealed the gardener, a figure in dark clothing who tended the gardens between midnight and 3 a.m. every night. The figure moved with ritualistic precision, speaking to each garden as if communicating with the deceased. The most disturbing discovery came when Jennifer found the 13th garden under construction. This garden was different from the others. It was larger, more elaborate, and the flower arrangement spelled out words: "Welcome home, Jennifer Walsh." Jennifer realized she was being stalked by the Midnight Gardener. Her investigation had made her the next target. She tried to leave the forest, but found that all trail markers had been changed to lead back to the gardens. Jennifer was found 3 days later, alive but catatonic. She'd been discovered in the center of the 13th garden, which had been completed around her while she slept. She was unharmed physically, but spoke only in whispers about seeds that had been planted in her mind. Jennifer's final report before her medical retirement contained a single sentence: "The gardens are growing, and they're hungry for new gardeners." Thornwood Forest remains closed. Satellite imagery shows the gardens are expanding, and new human-shaped plots appear after every full moon. The last radio message from this forest was impossible, and when investigators arrived, they found something worse than death. Whispering Pines Research Station in Alaska's Tongass National Forest went silent on December 21, 2021. The station's final radio transmission was recorded by multiple monitoring facilities, but the message was impossible. Research Station Coordinator Dr. Amanda Foster had been conducting wildlife population studies with a team of 6 scientists. Their daily check-ins were routine until the final transmission, which lasted 17 minutes and violated every law of physics. The transmission began normally. Base camp, this is Dr. Foster. Day 14 report. But the message continued with Dr. Foster describing events that were happening simultaneously from multiple different time periods. She reported snow falling while also describing spring flowers blooming. She mentioned seeing aurora borealis during daylight hours while also reporting complete darkness. Most disturbing, Dr. Foster's voice began overlapping with itself. The transmission contained the same voice, speaking different words at the same time, as if multiple versions of Dr. Foster were broadcasting simultaneously. The voices described different realities, one where the team was safe, one where they were under attack, one where they had never arrived at the station. Emergency responders reached Whispering Pines 3 days later and found the research station in impossible condition. The building existed in multiple states simultaneously. Some rooms were exactly as they should be. Others were flooded despite being 60 miles from any large water source, and others were burned out despite no evidence of fire. The team was discovered in the main laboratory, but their condition defied explanation. All 6 researchers were present, but they existed in different time periods. Dr. Foster appeared to be from 2021, while her colleague Dr. Yuki Tanaka appeared to be from 2019, based on the equipment he was using and the research data he was discussing. The researchers were conscious, but completely unaware of the temporal displacement. Each scientist believed they were experiencing normal time, while perceiving their colleagues as behaving strangely. They continued their research as if nothing unusual was happening, even though they were clearly existing in different temporal streams. Investigation revealed that the station had been built on an indigenous sacred site, a location where time was believed to flow differently. The researchers' equipment had somehow amplified the site's natural temporal properties, creating cascading time distortions that affected reality itself. The rescue attempt was abandoned when the response team began experiencing temporal displacement symptoms. 2 rescuers aged rapidly, while another began moving backwards through time, growing younger and losing memories. Whispering Pines Research Station was declared a temporal hazard zone. The final video transmission from inside the station shows Dr. Foster looking directly into the camera and saying, "We understand now. Time isn't linear here. We're not trapped in the past or future. We're trapped in all possible presents, and one of them is watching you right now." The transmission ended with all 6 researchers turning to look directly at the camera and speaking in unison, "We're still here. We're still researching. And we've learned things about time that you need to know." No further communication has been received from Whispering Pines, but the station's power consumption continues to increase every month. Satellite imagery shows the building is somehow larger than when it was originally constructed. These 13 stories represent documented cases that remain unsolved by authorities. Each incident was investigated, verified, and then quietly classified or ignored. The forests where these events occurred remain dangerous, and some continue to expand their zones of influence. If you've had similar experiences in forests around the world, share your stories in the comments. But be warned, documenting these phenomena often attracts unwanted attention from the things that call the deep woods home. Subscribe for more investigations into the places where reality breaks down. And remember, not every forest is just a collection of trees. Some are gateways to realities we were never meant to encounter. Stay safe, stay skeptical, and never hike alone in unfamiliar forests after midnight. The trees are always watching, and some of them remember everything they've seen.